Hello, everyone, and good morning, and welcome to day 8 of session here at Extreme Hangout. Thank you so much for those joining us here in Glasgow and to those joining us digitally. My name is Alex Otibanjo, and I work at One Young World. It is my pleasure to introduce the very first session of today entitled Integrated Community Forest Management, Protecting People and the Planet. On the slide behind me, you should find the Slido details where you're free to ask any questions you may have during this session. Without further ado, I am delighted to welcome the speakers to the stage. Please welcome Abdul Razak Saeed, Emmanuel Baranger, and Nasha Kuvilier. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. How are we going? We are starting the second week of COP26 here in Glasgow. Very proud to be here with you today. So last week was very interesting, not only for climate, but also for forests. We had a pledge of more than 100 countries signing to protect forests for 2030 and stop deforestation. Well, there have been some reactions to this pledge, right? Some people were happy about it and some were not, because they were saying, oh, are we going to deforest everything until 2030? Or is a good pledge that we have to support? So many things to discuss, but it's definitely a recognition of the role of forest in a climate action. So today, we have a huge and interesting panel about communities, forest, climate action. I'm very delighted to be here. So the forests are crucial, not only for protecting biodiversity and the livelihood of people, but also for climate action. Actually, 1.6 billion metric tons of CO2 could be captured if we protect forests. And I am correct, that's the same as taking off all the cars from the planet in one single day. So that's amazing, right? So we have to protect our forests. We know that. But how do we do that? So I am very delighted to say that the Rainforest Alliance is exactly that, an alliance, a broad alliance. We need farmers, we need consumers, we need companies, we need experts, we need governments, we need everyone engaged to protect our forests and have different ways of production and circularity consumption, so we can be aware that the role of forests that play and protect them for the better, right? So without further introduction, let me introduce you our panelists today. Let's start with Razak Abdul Saeed, right? So you are the leader of climate action inside Rainforest Alliance, right?
Yes, the team lead for climate change.
Great. So, and you are in charge with the whole strategy for mitigation and adaptation and the nature-based solutions. Can you tell me more about it?
Yes, okay. So nature-based solutions are a way for us to protect the forest, protect natural resources, also manage them sustainably, but then at the same time restore what we have lost, so that we can get the environment of the earth to a more resilient ecosystem, which allows people and nature to thrive together. Because that is the only way within which we'll have a sustainable development. So as part of this, we actually have a little introduction we would like to do to you in PowerPoint. So we will talk a bit more about what Rainforest Alliance is doing with regards to nature-based solutions with respect to integrated community forest management.
Okay, great. So without more delays, would you like to start with your presentation that you have for us today?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. I think I'll go to the podium.
Okay. Hello to everybody here, and then to all our audience joining us around the world. It's a pleasure for us to be here to share with you the work we do. And as you know, in our name Alliance, we try to work with different people, different stakeholders, different actors. So it will be good for you to know what we do and for you also to know more about the Alliance and be part of the Alliance. So there's a lot of press that we see day in, day out regarding what is happening with respect to nature destruction. We hear stuff around deforestation happening. We hear stuff around pollution. We hear stuff around spillage, degradation. And degradation is one of the things that is really picking up. So between 2010 to 2019, you have degradation, which is basically like selective destruction. You have fires that damage but do not destroy whole forest. You have, those activities that bring the quality of the forest down, but not total destruction, contributing about 3 times of the emissions than actual destruction of forest. But then on the other side, what we see, I'm not sure why this is not working. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so then we on the other side of it, we hear of other headings like floods, wildfires, as we saw a lot this year in Europe especially, how warming world is threatening agriculture and our food security, and we need to be able to put those together. So it's what we are doing to the earth, to the environment, to our natural resources, that is also coming back to us. So we are impacting negatively our environment, and that has a link to us. So just to illustrate what this means, when we increase and maintain forest, basically what we do is to get all these benefits. So we are able to have like good biodiversity, pollination, soil protection, non-timber forest products, and all these are a bit more local to those who then live around the resource. But then forests then serve a global good, which is that it helps with climate regulation, it helps absorb emissions from the atmosphere, and then it helps in terms of adaptation and resilience. So building the capacity of people who live close to these resources from the impacts that climate already is having and will have. And then on the opposite side of it is when we destroy forest, we then lose biodiversity, but then at the same time, we make the forest become a source of emissions. So it goes to add on to the problem that we're already having in terms of increased concentration of gases in the atmosphere. And then this compounds the problem of climate change, which in turn affects the structure and functionality of forest, and then the role that forest can play for us. So it becomes important that we then think about how to be smart about our forest management. And so this is where climate smart forestry comes in. Now with climate smart forestry, we need to understand what the risk, what the changes to climate is for the forest, and then that will help us to identify whether the management objective we have for the forest is going to be workable or not, because based on the changes, you know what efforts to put in place. But then the key thing here is that even though forest can be a resource for resilience or adaptation, we also need to think of the forest itself as a resource. Climate will also impact the forest. So how then do we make sure that we can use forest as an adaptation resource, but then how do we also protect the forest itself from the changing climate? And this is where what we've already destroyed comes in, so we need to restore more. This is why we need to protect what we already have to make sure that we can then increase and maintain forest and come back again to where we have the good things, the green side. So the thing is never to be going back to where the red is, where the negative actions are. So this just gives an illustration. I won't talk much on this because my colleague Emmanuel will zoom in on this, but then it just lets you have a good understanding of how much forest contribute to absorbing the greenhouse gases we put in the atmosphere. Now, this graph illustrates that natural climate solutions, which is what I've talked about, how we make sure that we protect our natural resources, are part of the solution to addressing climate. We recognize that fossil fuel, stopping fossil fuel use is one of the key areas within which we can address the emissions going to the atmosphere, but then there's a role for natural climate solutions within the 2-degree pathway. Now, the challenge is that even though natural climate solutions, nature-based solutions help with other issues around socioeconomic aspects and not just the environment, it hasn't really received a lot of funding. And here at COP26, we are hearing a lot of pledges and a lot of numbers, but then we need to move to the action. That is what is key. And so sustainably managing our forest, making sure that we are able to be, for instance, areas like agriculture is nature positive in the sense that the way we use our resources, the way we produce does not impact our environment to the detriment of it, but then we are able to build a healthy ecosystem because that's the basis around which we can build a resilient, should I say, economy or earth. I'll hand over now to my colleague, Emmanuel, who is the forest lead in the Rainforest Alliance.
Thank you very much, Said. Thank you for introducing Emmanuel. So Emmanuel Béranger, right? So you are the global team leader for sustainable forest management. Some of your colleagues say that you work with a lot of passion and knowledge with the communities in the forest. And we would like to know more about the role of communities, forests, and if you can go on with your presentation.
Sure, thank you very much. Thank you, Said, also for the general introduction. So I will deep dive a little bit on the role of tropical forest and the role of communities. And it's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you for hosting us. So as Said said, in the nature-based solution, which is part of the solution, of course, not the whole solution, tropical forests play a very important role. And you see that there are actually two major parts where tropical forests play an important role. One is about avoided tropical deforestation, and I think that has been very high on the agenda to stop deforestation, and this is really critical. But you can see that even more important is to restore forests and to improve the management of forests. And this part is something which is not so high on the agenda, and nobody really speaks about what to do in that part, which is really critical. So I'm going to focus on the improved management. Before I go into the solutions, just a bit of a scope of why we have this problem of deforestation and degradation. So on the left, you will see per region, the general trend is really agriculture, either commercial agriculture or local subsistence agriculture, depending on the region, is more or less strong. But this is like 70 to 80%, 90% of the cause of deforestation. There's also, of course, infrastructure, mining, and urban expansion, but at a minor level. If you look on the right graph, this is the cause of degradation. So the part that we mentioned is also as important as deforestation. And degradation is really different causes. It's really different causes. It's timber logging, mostly. Unsustainable timber logging. That has been high on the agenda in the past, in the 90s and 80s, and now somehow it's disappeared. And we speak of protecting forests and planting forests, but actually if we manage them well, we can really find a solution here to stop the degradation. So timber logging, there's in Africa also charcoal production is a high footprint, transforming forests into fuel wood for cooking. Yes, this is basically the two main causes. The role of forest communities in that. Well, they just manage 1/3 of the world's tropical forest by right. And the devolution of right is increasing because governments recognize that actually they have been there before and there is no reason not to give them back their land, especially to indigenous people. So we should see even more of that area of tropical forest being managed by local communities and indigenous people. This 1.6 billion people that live in or near or from the forest in the world. So it's a large amount of people, a large area. And today they receive less than 1.7% support from the climate finance. So there's really here a gap that we all call on, to the COP26 and governments to address. And also, what we've seen is not only they are responsible for such a large part of tropical forest, but actually they do a really good job in keeping the forest, in managing it well. Of course, they need support, and it's not always easy for them to achieve that. And there has been cases where local communities have been destroying forests. That's also true. It's not like a silver bullet. But definitely we have here a pathway of solution. And research has shown in these 9 countries, I think, yeah, that in the last 10 years, areas that were managed by local communities and indigenous people are far less deforested than the national average. National average is in blue, local communities is in green, and protected area in yellow. And in some countries, even have actually locally managed forests more protected than protected areas themselves. So this number speaks for themselves. So here we have really part of the solution, right? And it's also something that is fair and right, because these people are on the ground living from the forest and they do the job well, and they should just be given more rights and more support to do that. Here's an example of an area we have been working for the last 20 years as the Rainforest Alliance, with a broad alliance of partners and funders like the USAID. It's the Maya Biosphere Reserve. It's a very large area of several 100,000 hectares. There's 9 community forest concessions. We've been working for 20 years there, and in 20 years, there is no deforestation where the communities manage the forest. And when in the surrounding buffer zone, even the core protected areas, there has been deforestation. So, here we go. My last technical slide before I go into what we're doing at the Rainforest Alliance about it and then go into the Q&A. So I've been speaking of sustainable forest management, but as we saw on the graph about the number of billion of tons that we could save, there's also reforestation and restoration. In some places, forest has been so degraded that it's just not about good management, it's about giving back what has been lost. And there are several ways of doing it. You have seen probably a lot of tree plantation initiative, which is good because it's really a positive movement into restoring forests. But there are actually some basic ecological things to keep in mind when doing restoration or reforestation. First is that it needs to be done with the people in the ground, on the field. You need to work with the communities and the villagers, because they are the one on there that is going to manage and live and get the benefit from this project. The second is use natural regeneration as much as possible. We have seen, for example, plantation initiative in Turkey, millions of trees planted, millions of trees who died because it was just the wrong species, planted at the wrong time, in the wrong place. And so much money wasted for nothing, when actually nature does things really well. Actually, there were trees before human. I hope there will still be humans when there are still trees, right? So natural regeneration is really a way to have seedlings that are well adapted, well rooted, and nature does it best. Whenever we need to plant, because sometimes we do need to plant to accelerate regeneration, it's important to maximize biodiversity by using the right species that are there or can survive also with climate change, but are adapted environmentally speaking. And finally, one thing that is often forgotten is make it pay for the local people. They should get some economic benefit. What does not bring any benefit either in terms of spiritual value, in terms of non-timber forest products, in terms of medicine, in terms of timber for the market, will not stay over the long term. So when reforesting or restoring forest, make it pay for the local people. So what do we do at the Rainforest Alliance? We basically have just published a few months ago a position paper on integrated community forest management that, if you want to have more details, we invite you to read. But in a nutshell, we work with 5 basic principles wherever we go, and we work in many countries, and we have offices there. Our first motto is that forest values should always be protected, and forest values is all the services that they provide to nature, but also to people. That local communities are the ones that are the ecosystem stewards, and we need to scale up what they're doing for the forest and really give them support at scale. The third principle is that responsible forest management is part of the solution. And protecting forests is good, but sometimes it's even better to just have good management by local people. The third principle is that communities should be supported to adapt and to climate change. And we can talk more of that in the Q&A, but we have seen that diversification is a way to have more resilience in terms of the forest, but also economically. The more there is a different type of tree growing, the more there's different type of products being used by the communities, the more resilience there is. And finally, livelihoods, yes, that's what I said, you know, must be strengthened. So without thriving communities that can develop themselves, having job, keeping young people in the forest, there is no way that the forest is going to be kept. It's just going to be destroyed. And our areas of intervention in a nutshell, and this is my last slide, really, I promise. So we have here a gradient of the forest degradation, let's call it like this, natural forest on the left, and then very heavily degraded forest on the right. So in some cases, there's protected areas, and then, of course, we make sure that they are maintained. Our key intervention is really support forest preservation through community forest management, and this is still in natural forest and at the frontier with agroforest. We work a lot in agroforest in restoring them and increasing the cover by planting trees. Like in our standard at the Rainforest Alliance, we require a minimum level of tree cover. Then wherever there is agriculture, we have a no deforestation policy, obviously, and we try to promote agroforest transition because it's more biodiverse. And then wherever it's really heavily degraded, in some places we support reforestation and plantation or natural regeneration. So this is basically the panel of solutions that we try to bring collectively with partners, of course, and with the communities on the ground. Thank you very much.
How interesting, right? To understand about the role of forests and to understand how and who are there on the ground protecting the forest and the role they play. So we are now starting a Q&A session, which is normally and sometimes the best part of debate, right? So I have 3 questions for you, and then we are going to move some questions for you, so maybe you can starting to think about what would you like to ask to our experts. And we may have also some questions online, so more than glad to share with you. So my first question, Said. Is agroforestry a good solution to fight climate change?
Thank you very much, Nasha. Yes, so agroforestry is definitely one of the good ways to address the climate crisis. Let me just set the basis of what agroforestry is first. So with agroforestry, what you do is that you have trees incorporated within production systems. So it could be agriculture, but then also you could have agroforest as riparian buffers. So it protects water bodies. You could also have what we call farming under forest, right? So they actually do the production within the forest without having to clear the trees. And this is different from context to context. So for instance, in the Ghana situation, we have what we call admitted farms, which are farms that have been mapped and they are within like a protected area. But then they don't have the right to therefore, you know, destroy the forest. So I'm just setting this basis so I can then delve into how agroforestry can help with climate change. One of the easiest ways that we all know is that when we plant trees, it absorbs carbon from the atmosphere. So that's the easiest way. So whether we protect the standing trees or whether we restore, we then get to sequester the carbon from the atmosphere, thereby reducing the concentrations in the atmosphere. But then the other ways within which agroforestry helps is that when you have incorporated, for instance, trees on farm, it helps keep the soil healthy. So, for instance, if you have like harsh weather conditions like heavy rainfall, it doesn't get to erode the soil or degrade the soil, right? So in that sense, it keeps the soil intact. It also introduces biodiversity into the production area, and therefore that also helps with things around like pollination, you know, to take place. Now, when you have a healthy soil, which is the basis of production, it means that farmers may have less need for chemical inputs like fertilizer. And with fertilizer, one of the key things is nitrous oxide, right? So having agroforestry means that you reduce the need for that fertilizer, so you avoid emissions. So the other one is that it sequesters, the other one is that indirectly you avoid emissions. Let me also just give another example. So for instance, when you plant trees, you improve the microclimate of the specific area within which you've planted those trees. So it could be cooler, and then where it would have been like increasing or warming, weather or temperature, you would have within that microclimate built a certain adaptation component of it. So then reliance now on energy use, which could come from fossil fuel, reduces. So it means that you don't then also, put a lot more carbon into the atmosphere. So yes, definitely agroforestry is one of the ways. But the reason why I tend to also like agroforestry is that it allows you to include the local people within, the action towards climate change. So getting farmers, getting forest dwellers to understand the role that agroforestry plays, and therefore getting them to be involved in that implementation and decision making is key to addressing the climate crisis. So yes, this is the ways within which agroforestry helps to address climate change.
Great, thank you. So how important is to plant trees, right? Of course, the right type of trees,
Exactly.
and etc. It's local, but it's not only about capturing CO2, it's about protecting the soil, it's about giving the community far more benefits than only capturing CO2 and avoiding nitrous, phosphorus emissions that also global warming, causing global warming, right?
Exactly.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So we have another question. We've been talking about the role of communities helping us to fight climate change, but are they also vulnerable to climate change? Can they resist the impacts of climate change? And how can we support them? How can we help them to be more resilient?
Yes, thank you. Very good question. So, indeed, we have seen that forests are often seen as a solution, but they are actually one of the first victims, right, of climate change. We've seen the huge fires, for example, lately. It's really so sad, to see everything disappear like this, and then when the forest is gone, it takes years to grow back. So this is definitely something that we need to help the communities with, to prevent that these large fires, for example, take place. Of course, this is part of the project that we do on the ground, where there is a potentially fire. I did mention that where it's community managed forest, there is no fires because we help them to build towers, to look at the forest, and then they have a system to warn each other and to stop the fire from spreading. But the truth is that most of these fires are criminal fires to transform forest into agriculture. So the more there is investment from the communities in the forest, the more they are eager to protect this area from encroachment from large-scale agriculture. So how can we help them to do that? Well, this is, and that was actually the title, long title of this session, what we called integrated community forest management. So helping the communities to manage the forest, the technical aspect. This is the easy part, and this is definitely not enough. Giving rights to the communities, this is a basis, but this is not enough either. So what communities need is what we call an enabling environment. An enabling environment is investors, people that trust them and give them the means to be able to invest in developing the enterprises. We need alliances at scale in the landscape or at the national level that gives them support and a voice so that they can be heard in the right places. And we also need access to a market. And for now, the market access is very difficult. The communities are very isolated. How do we bring all these communities together so that they can sell their products in the local market, regional market, or even international market? And this is where companies play a role. And I have here a slide behind me giving you an example of one of the initiatives we have, and there are many, of course, like this. We're not the only ones. With Forest Allies, we try to bring companies on board that go beyond their supply chain. So until now, companies have been investing in their supply chain to clean it, as we say, Look where they buy, make sure it's not deforested, and then, it's good. Yeah. Which is good, I'm not saying it's already the first step, right? But then, things don't work just at one community or one forest level. You need to make sure that, for example, there is access, roads, that there is the government that gives the right for example, transporting wood. Sometimes there is a community forest and there is no right to transport wood for the community. So what do you do with that, right? So all these little, big, important things that are roadblocks, we need to identify and take away together, not just company by company or community by community. So we've built this alliance with companies and communities at some landscape level to really alleviate these roadblocks. And this is what we're trying to do, yeah.
Wow, amazing. Thank you very much. I've been touched by what you said about the fires. In my case, in my country, in Argentina, the last fires we had the last year, they not only took the biodiversity, also some houses. So it's already affecting also people, not only by really directly. Of course, we're all affected by forest loss. So it's so important to have an integrated management of forests. And talking about that, I think, and I see more and more young people leading some projects for reforestation, conservation, cleanups, etc. Sometimes I'm a One Young World ambassador, and some of us are called like, you are the generation that is going to regenerate the planet. So I would like to go a little bit more inside this idea, and I would like to ask how young people are working inside the Rainforest Alliance. How do they help them with your mission?
Yes, I can start and maybe Said, then you will complete. So young people are really, really important in community forest management because this is transmission of knowledge that needs to be kept, the traditional knowledge, also the new knowledge that we can bring to them, in particular for enterprise or community forest management. So we have, when we come, we always design projects in a participatory manner, and we make sure that youth are included as well as, of course, as women and more marginalized groups. Make sure that they are part of the project, that they are not partners in the project, because we don't speak of beneficiaries, but of partners in the project. And where needed, we actually even channel funds, for example, for them to study and have techniques that can help the community, that they bring back, and then they can have a position. And we have been very successful in the Maya Biosphere Reserve, for example, where actually there has been almost no youth out-migration. They didn't leave their village or their region. They actually came back when they've studied, and they've managed to find jobs and have a family there, and they didn't have to go out because they couldn't live in the area. So that's really what we try to do, yeah.
Said, do you want to compliment?
Yes, yeah, thank you for that question. Just to add to my colleague Emmanuel's point, so at the Rainforest Alliance, one of the key things we recognize is that yes, young people or the youth are important, but then they are all not the same. So their needs, the opportunities that they have are different. So to involve young people, we always have to establish a baseline, right? And then that baseline identifies what those needs are or what those opportunities are. So for example, within a landscape or a community, you could have people who are able to inherit land from their parents, right? And then you have youth who are not going to inherit any land. So then their needs are different if it comes to natural resource management, if it comes to climate change, you know, whether it's adaptation or mitigation. So you need to be able to identify all these different categories of the youth, and then use that then to build and design, you know, together the kind of intervention that is going to be beneficial to them. But then the key thing is that we want to be able, because you hear of youth living like those forested or natural resource landscapes because it's that they feel it will be easier to be in a more formal, you know, job setting or go to the city. And so what does that mean for like our natural resource management, but then also for our food security? So we need to be able to engage the youth to understand what, you know, what is possible, what can be done, and then have them in there. One of the other key things is that aside from, let's say, working within the landscape where for want of a better term, I would say it's more informal. We also have like the formal education setting, right? Where we have gone into schools, where we have made sure that we have engaged students to understand issues around, let's say, forest management, climate change adaptation, but then also in terms of commodity production, in order to get them within that thinking of, okay, we need to be more nature positive in producing. These are better ways we can do this than what has been done in the past. So that in that sense, we build a more resilient society and then also economy. So yeah, this is how we involve the youth, but then we also need to learn from our approach. And as part of that, we have like indicators that we are able to monitor and measure based on the objectives we had set to achieve within the landscapes, but then also to learn from the youth whether those steps we had taken were the right steps to achieve those objectives. And then we learn from those so that we're able to improve other interventions that we have within the landscapes that we work in.
Wow, wonderful.
We have actually two small short videos, maybe just to illustrate as a testimony, just after that.
Yes, it will be lovely if you can share.
I'm not sure.
If you click on it.
Tal vez la próxima generación en hacernos cargos de alguna de muchas comunidades del mundo. Y qué mejor manera de poder hacerlo de una manera íntegra, involucrando a jóvenes, involucrando a mujeres, involucrando a las personas de la comunidad. Y claro, tener siempre en cuenta que hay que hacer un aprovechamiento sostenible.
Anak muda memiliki pemikiran yang baru dan selalu segar, yang cocok dengan perkembangan zaman sekarang. Maka dari itu, peran anak muda terbilang penting di dunia pertanian.
So interesting, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah, no, so I just wanted to point out, so you realize that the emphasis on the agricultural sector is because, like Emmanuel said, forests are cleared in order to make sure that, agriculture takes place in those lands. And that is how come the amount of emissions from, the agricultural, forest, and land use sector is quite huge. So it's important that in addressing these problems, we don't take like climate as one entity, forest as another entity, but then it's an integrated approach where we look at climate, livelihoods, biodiversity, natural resources in order to close the loop and have an integrated like landscape that is climate resilient.
thank you very much. And I can share with you a small experience, but in my country, in Argentina, I had the opportunity to work with a small community, and actually what you were saying actually happens, that when you don't have opportunities for the young people, they have to migrate. And also the forest doesn't sustain anymore the families that are there, and sometimes also the parents have to migrate. So protecting the forest is not only for the forest itself and the biodiversity, also for the people, and you have like a virtual cycle of protecting and having more livelihoods for everyone, right? Okay, thank you very much. So do we have any questions? Yeah? Yes, go.
First of all, hats off to Extreme Hangout for creating this wonderful space for young people, especially for the ones who cannot go into the exclusive blue zone. So thank you for your excellent presentation. My name is Lingo. I come from the Eastern Himalayan foothills. We are working with indigenous peoples to restore ecosystems from the Himalayas, where our glaciers are melting, with cloud forest ecosystems, all the way to the Indian Ocean, where we are planting mangrove trees, and I love what you're doing. I'm also part of a consortium here called C6, which is Cultural Creativity Collaboration to Combat Climate Change. And I met a lot of indigenous youth, because you're targeting youth. And I've been following these RED negotiations in all these climate circles in Bali, when they talk about reduced emissions from deforestation, degradation, and the safeguards, the plus plus. But the reality is that most of these indigenous people, they never got the money, and they are protecting these forests, and the governments are holding their money, and they would be lucky to get like 1 or 2%. It's unbelievable, but obviously all these stewards around the world where RED projects are being done have made complaints. So what are you guys going to do for your projects, especially to pay the stewards who are protecting our ecosystems, to protect their culture, to protect their heritage, indigenous people, and to reward the real people that are the stewards of these forests for centuries? exploited right now as we speak, who be in the streets, what are you going to do to make sure that their integrity and their livelihoods are not, exploited in the name of red? Because there's so much to talk about carbon, but until and unless these real people are rewarded, it's not going to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
question. So, would you like to take the question?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. It's brilliant, and definitely I share in what you're saying that there is a lot of, news from the ground about how there are some injustices that seem to be going around. With the Rainforest Alliance, we are not working on a red project that is carbon related just to pay for what the carbon saved or in terms of what has been done. So as I mentioned earlier, I said that we need to work in a holistic way where you have the biodiversity, you have the people's livelihoods, you have the natural resources, you have, what did I call it? Climate, yes, the resilience aspect, all working together. So what we do is that we work in an alliance with the people, for the people, and then we work to make sure that we are able to protect the integrity of these natural ecosystems. We also work with local, like you are saying, local communities through local governance bodies that, for instance, we bring up. So we build their capacity. So when they have to engage with governments, they have that capacity to be able to engage the government and understand what it is. Because some of the issues has been that people who are stewards of this may not be in the full known or have the full capacity, right? So we try to build the capacity of these people so that where it happens that they have to engage in such interventions, they have a certain capacity. But then what we do helps to build the natural resource integrity, which indirectly goes to benefit the people. Because if you have, for instance, a healthy ecosystem, it means that it allows all your other livelihoods to go on. So in that case, for us, this is where the benefit is. One, building the capacity of the people so they're able to engage whichever actor comes into their landscape. Two, helping them with their livelihoods in the sense that you have a nature-positive environment that protects them, but then also builds their resilience outside of livelihoods so that when there's a climatic stress, they are able to withstand those stresses. And then three is the fact that there is this working cohesion, right, that allows us to understand what further problems they are having within the work that we do and then be able to address it. So unfortunately, I don't know if my colleague has anything to say to this, but unfortunately within that space of Red Plus, the carbon money, and then those issues around injustices, I think we have I am aware of other organizations that also work within this space to make it happen. But we try to put down the enabling environment, give the people the capacity so that when such things come in there, they are able to fight for it. Unfortunately, yes, definitely. It can't all be the same everywhere, and we need to keep fighting against all these injustices that happen with such projects. Yes.
And I would like to also highlight something that you brought on the presentation you did, is about the role of local communities protecting the forest, and the study you made showing that sometimes ecosystems protected by local communities are better protected than those from private or public sectors as conservation by itself. So thanks to studies that show and can demonstrate and can be useful data to prove governments how local communities have a key role in protecting forests, is something also good that with the Alliance you can help to understand governments for a better protecting their environments, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so the issue is that we have to try as a people not to be carbon-centric. Yes, and then that is where the challenge may be, because there are a lot of other benefits that can come from, such interventions or such arrangements. But we don't also need to look at those interventions as co-benefits, because then it allows us to just focus on, the carbon aspect. And then that links to just, the funds or the money aspect, and then all those other injustices will then rear its ugly head. So basically that's how, I see it.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your question.
I wanted to hear from you because you showed all those measurements, which is so important. Now, everyone is talking about nature-based nature-based solutions, IUCN, they're coming with the standards and everything, but you as an indigenous person have been doing nature-based solution for centuries, you know? It's just that we didn't put the word nature-based solution because that's the way you live. It's the way you value nature, Mother Earth, very different from perhaps the Western way. But they just came up with the name nature-based solutions. Now everybody's jumping on the bandwagon of going beyond carbon and looking at ecosystem services and putting a value on that. But as an indigenous person, your value with the earth is completely different. You are born in that land. You will protect it till you die for generations to come. So what do you think about all this talk about nature-based solutions and quantification of ecosystem services in the marketplace?
So I think Said has given already a part of the answer. And I think in the beginning also of our presentation, we did say that the first thing is really to reduce fossil fuel use. You know, nature-based solution has been carried by the NGO community as a sign that, yes, forests are important and that communities have a solution and that indigenous people are important. And reducing fossil fuel first, but recognize the right of indigenous people. So this is something that I think was the idea originally. And of course, once the concept is on the table, you have a lot of people that want to use it to divert attention maybe to more critical action that they should take, right? And that's not the right way to do it. But nature-based solutions are part of the solution because we need to keep the forest. And we need to keep the forest through and with the local communities and the indigenous people. And this is our messaging. So carbon accounting is just one way to measure. But there is biodiversity accounting, there is livelihoods, gender, youth integration, there is rights devolution, there is all these other measurements that needs to be there on top of climate accounting. And we have not been, as a Rainforest Alliance, going into that direction of carbon accounting because we know it's so reducing all the values of the forest. But in some cases, it can bring some benefits to local people if well done, but definitely it's not a silver bullet either.
Thank you very much. So, yes, so do we have a question? Come.
Hello? Yeah, sorry. Just being here, the voice of the digital attendees at the session, thank you so much. We've had amazing feedback. And just based as well on everything that has been said, you know, this forum exactly is to have these hard conversations, to bring these topics to the table and have this discussion. And ultimately at this hangout as well, what we, with One Young World and with Extreme Hangouts, we just want to bring the voice of young people to this discussion to find the solution. So let's just keep the conversation going and open and constructive. So just having said that, we've had amazing feedback from the attendees, and I just wanted to, obviously for you as well, Nasha as a One Young World ambassador, but for all of the other panelists, have a question, solution-based in terms of what are the advice that you can give right now to young people that are watching this session, that are watching these conversations, that are here at COP or back at home, to go on and actually take action and be impactful in fighting deforestation? So what are the actual action points that they can take on tomorrow after this session? Thank you.
So I'm going to start with that answer. Actually, back home, I live 100 kilometers away from a big city, Buenos Aires, and actually I live in a rural area. And I want to convince my local government to make a new conservation area. So the first step I'm going to take is to take all the data I was able to gather during this COP. I am an environmental scientist, but I always study climate change. And now I think it's the time to go deep inside the relationship between biodiversity and climate, and not only to focus on carbon, as we were talking about. So the first step is to take the data, to convince other local people and NGOs and youth-driven initiatives to come together and to go with the government with a solid proposal on why we need to protect the environment. And after that, just to keep going, you know, to keep the energy going and make alliances and share some solutions with other NGOs led by young people, because you have a lot to learn about people who already have done the job. So that will be our first steps, but I will love to hear what do you have as an advice for young people at their homes. How can they lead conservative projects?
All right, thank you very much, Nasha, for adding on that. So yes, it's good that you bring in the aspect of data. because that's one of the key things that you can use to influence decision-making policy. So I have the benefit of knowing how like a youth organization in my country works, in the sense that they do all the necessary. So for instance, making the demand to be heard, right? But in making that demand to be heard, and that always has to happen, because if not, people are representing different interests, right? So in making that demand to be heard, you need to be able to always provide an analysis of how certain decisions that have to be taken will impact the youth, right? So if, for instance, like the government was discussing nature-based solutions within their nationally determined contributions, right? And then you wanted the youth to be heard, making that demand is one, but then it's not just enough to say, like, listen to the youth or include the youth. Yes, so you need to already come up with an analysis of how those decisions will impact the youth within your context, and then use that to push whilst you make the demand. So this is one of the key things. And then really it's about being involved when certain interventions come within the areas that you live in, and not allowing, should I say, the youth just to have been written in a proposal or intervention somewhere, and then just having like a few dollars, attributed to it, just because you want to tick the box. So it has to be like a conscious, analytical, and a diagnostic approach to having youth engage within these things. And I'm sorry it may sound like, but I feel like, yes, that's the basis, making that demand constantly, because we need to push the youth and make sure that we are ahead and we are in the center of that. That's one of the key ways that we can still be listened to.
Yes, I would say that indeed building alliances, not feeling alone, being with others is important. That's what we're doing here, and that's really critical. So thank you very much for being there and existing and having all this great energy. I would also take it more maybe on a more personal note. I think that Gandhi said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." So already what we do every day, even very small, it's contribution to change. This is a huge task ahead of us, and of course, we can feel very small, but then one step at a time, each of the drops will make the big rivers and the big seas. So just keep courage and do one step at a time what you can do, and it's already good enough, and then I'm sure that if all these energies add up, in the end, we'll make it. The change is still possible. It's ahead of us. It's not too late. We've heard that. It's not too late. It can happen. And we see all the young people rising, and less young people also trying to do something. So yeah, we can do it.
Thank you very much for that question. We have just some last minutes. Do we want to have a last question from the public? Would you like to have a last question? Yeah.
Thank you. I would be interested to hear a little bit more about the role of markets in this model, and how can each of us and consumers can have an influence as well through the markets, please.
Yes, so when I was speaking of individual choices, this is indeed also with consumption. We know that some products more than others lead to deforestation. So by choosing products that are neither contributing to deforestation or are certified not contributing to deforestation, here you have, for example, for wood, you have the FSC certification. For coffee, cocoa, you would have a Rainforest Alliance certification, or some other certification. I'm sure I'm not a specialist on that. Then it's better to buy local products when it's for local production, because then there is less transport, and I'm sure Said can contribute more in terms of consumption. Wasting food has a very large footprint, because we spend so much energy in producing food, and half of it is just gone. Either it's because it's wasted, or it's lost because the cold chain doesn't exist in some countries. So being mindful of how much we purchase and how much we can eat, so that we don't have to waste. So all these things that I think we know, right, in theory, if we can apply them a little bit more each day, reducing things that can be thrown away and recycle, reuse, all these steps that I'm sure others have talked about are important. I don't know, Said, if you want to complete. Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So, great session, right? Talking about the role of forests, the role of communities, the role of ecosystems, how we can fight climate change, but also to protect biodiversity and at the same time protect the livelihood of those who are the most vulnerable right now to climate change impacts and other human impacts, and how can we help them to be integrated in a market that is sustainable. And so really great session. I would like to know if you would like to have some last thoughts to share with our public. I would like to share that I'm very glad that the young people are on the table, because sometimes they are not. And actually, young people has a lot to learn, but also they come sometimes with another vision about what we should do with the planet. And we have been so many great leaders during the last week speaking to the to our governors and decision making. So it's been really nice and critical to hear more about the young people. But I totally think that we need an intergenerational dialogue, right? And having all the knowledge from previous generation, and to put it to work towards the protecting our forests and our people for our planet. So, Said, would you like to share any final thoughts about the session?
Yes. Just to add to yours, also, yes, so we need an intergenerational dialogue in order to pick the past, but then also to think of those yet unborn in order to protect the environment for them. And for us to maximize the climate benefits of forests, natural resources, we need to work to protect and keep more of these resources intact, sustainably manage what we have, and then restore what we have destroyed and lost. And so at the heart of it, it's time that we take nature and the environment as the core around which we develop, and not as an externality to our development. And within that, I mean, as a group of people who have come together to help build a more resilient earth, that should be the development pathway that we take, that the environment is the basis upon which we develop. And so it features centrally within all the decisions that we take. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Said. And I would say that very complementary. And the second leg we need to walk on is putting at the center of our work the people, right? Making sure that local communities, indigenous people, but basically all of us are the ones that are making the change and benefit from the change. In the past, we had a lot of talk about participatory approach, about bottom-up approach, and yes, this is good and this needs to continue, but there is definitely a gap between connecting the needs on the ground and what is being decided at the top. So we need to have more space where the bottom-up and top-down can meet and where there can be dialogue. And so we try by building capacities of the local communities and helping them to organize so they can bring their voice. But there needs also to be that movement from the top to really come down and listen to the people. And I think that still needs to happen. We still have not really seen that in all these big events like COP26 and this international conversation. There have been some leaders coming, very prominent, very, very strong from the Amazonian forest, from other parts of the world to speak up about their needs and who they are, but this has been like more events really than more dialogue. So we need more dialogue between the decision makers and those that are actually living on this planet, the 99%, is it right? And the 1% that has almost all the riches in the world. So we need to have more space for dialogue, and we hope that indeed we can do that in the future. But the more we can support local communities, indigenous people, the more we can do something with them in the field or speak with them in such fora, I think the more we can in the future hopefully have that conversation.
And for a final thought, I am a very privileged person because I had the opportunity to connect like more directly with nature because I live in a rural area. But I will encourage you to have time, at least sometimes in the year, sometimes in the day, to connect with nature. Connect with something that is not our human-made things or livelihoods. You can do it, but just having some plants in your apartment, right? But to watch that we are not the only species on Earth, that we have to understand the role that we are part of a big system, a big planet, and the planet is one, right? So what happens to other species directly affects us, and we can affect positively other species too. So thank you very much for everyone to join in this session. Thank you very much for all that have been online. Let's keep the conversation alive, right? Social media nowadays can help us to keep the conversation with Rainforest Alliance, with One Young World, with the Extreme Hangout. We have full sessions today agenda, so you can watch it online. And thank you very much, all of you, for coming today.
Oh, thank you so much, you guys, for such a really insightful, enriching conversation. Can we just have another round of applause for these amazing speakers? And, thank you for just starting off today on such a strong note, drawing attention to collaboration, intergenerational dialogue, and empowering local communities to protect their planet. So again, thank you so much. The theme for today is adaptation, loss, and damage. So food, farming, and forests. And we have content created today by the Rainforest Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us here in Glasgow digitally, and also for joining us here in Glasgow and joining us digitally. Please stay tuned for the next session at 12 p.m. and we'll see you then. Thank you.